My name is Kimberly Cook. I am 31 years old, and I teach high school history in Michigan. 3 weeks ago, my sister threw a champagne celebration dinner the day she inherited $10 million from our grandfather. I was not invited. Instead, I was sitting alone in my car in a law office parking lot, holding the only thing he left me, a battered leather notebook with a tarnished brass lock. My family laughed when the attorney handed it to me. My brother-in-law actually scoffed out loud. They thought I walked away with junk. They thought they won. But they did not know that my grandfather never left me memories. He left me a map. Before I tell you what was inside that notebook, I want to welcome you to Elderly Stories. If you find this story worth hearing, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to stay until the end. I would love to know who is listening, so drop a comment with your age, location, and local time. Now let me take you back to that morning in Grand Rapids. The law office was all cold glass and gray carpet. I sat at the far end of the conference table. My parents, Gregory and Susan, sat across from me, flanking my sister Jessica and her husband Brad. Brad wore a tailored suit and checked his watch every 5 minutes like we were wasting his tea time. The lawyer sat at the head of the table, adjusting his reading glasses. He cleared his throat and read the final wishes of William Cook. To my granddaughter Jessica, I leave the sum of $10 million and the primary estate assets. Jessica gasped. Susan reached over and squeezed her hand. Gregory nodded like a business deal just closed in his favor. It was the same look of pride he gave her when she announced her destination wedding. A wedding they paid for while telling me they had no money left to help with my college tuition. I took out student loans and became a teacher. She got a free ride. The lawyer turned the page, and to my granddaughter Kimberly, I leave my personal leather ledger. He slid the book across the polished oak table. The brass lock clinking against the wood echoed in the quiet room. Brad exhaled a sharp, mocking breath. A diary, he whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Fitting. Jessica leaned forward. She put on her best performance of sympathy, the kind she uses when other people are watching. "Oh, Kim," she said, "do not worry. I will buy you a coffee with the new money. We can go shopping." I did not scream. I did not cry. 12 years of being pushed to the edges of this family taught me the value of silence. I picked up the notebook. The leather felt heavy. It smelled faint like pine needles and old paper. As a history teacher, I spend my days analyzing the rise and fall of empires. I watch patterns repeat. Sitting in that room, I watched my family fall into the oldest trap in the book: arrogance. The lawyer cleared his throat again, trying to regain control of the room. He read the next line. "Please note, there is a mandatory 30-day waiting period before the liquid dispersal of the estate." Nobody heard him. Jessica was already leaning toward Brad, talking about a kitchen remodel. Brad was whispering about buying a boat. My parents were beaming at the daughter they always preferred. They already spent the money in their heads. They ignored the waiting period. They ignored the fine print. They ignored me. I stood up and pushed my chair in. The scrape of the legs against the carpet made Jessica look up, but she looked right past me. I walked out of the glass room while they were still calculating their new tax bracket. The Michigan air was crisp outside. I got into my used Honda Civic and shut the door, cutting off the noise of the city. I sat behind the steering wheel and looked at the notebook in my lap. The brass lock was stubborn and there was no key. I ran my thumb along the spine. The leather was worn soft from years of my grandfather carrying it in his coat pocket. I thought about throwing it in the passenger seat and driving home. Then my finger caught on something. Near the bottom edge, pressed hard into the binding, was a faint sequence of numbers, 4 digits, 1998, the year my grandmother died. I stared at the numbers. My grandfather built a construction empire from scratch. He never did anything by accident. If he wanted to leave me a sentimental keepsake, he would have given me a photo album. He gave me a locked ledger. I traced the numbers again. My family was upstairs measuring their $10 million. They thought they held all the cards. They had no idea that the real game had not even started yet. The drive from Grand Rapids took just under an hour, but it felt like crossing into a different universe. I left the towering glass office buildings behind and headed west toward the coast. The sky over Lake Michigan was the color of bruised iron. I turned my Honda onto the familiar gravel driveway lined with ancient white pines. At the end of the dirt road sat my home. It was a secondary cabin wrapped in weathered cedar siding. My grandfather offered me this place 5 years ago when I secured my first teaching position. He knew I could barely afford rent on a public school salary while carrying the weight of my student debt. The cabin was humble. The windows rattled when the wind blew off the water, and the stone fireplace required constant attention in the winter to keep the main room warm. My desk in the corner was covered in stacks of ungraded history essays. I built a quiet, independent life here. It was my sanctuary. Jessica and my parents never visited. They preferred their gated communities and manicured lawns. To them, this cabin was just an unpolished tax liability rotting in the woods. I carried the heavy leather notebook inside and locked the deadbolt behind me. The kitchen was silent. I set my car keys on the counter and placed the ledger in the center of the worn wooden dining table. I pulled out a chair and sat down. The brass lock caught the dim afternoon light filtering through the glass. I traced my index finger over the dials. There were 4 tumblers. My grandfather was a methodical man who built a construction empire from the dirt up. He did not believe in random variables. I aligned the first dial to the number 1, then 9, then 9 again. Finally, I rolled the last tumbler to an 8, 1998, the year we stood in a freezing cemetery and buried my grandmother. A sharp metallic click broke the silence of the room. The clasp released. I folded the thick leather cover back. I expected to find a journal. I expected pages filled with cursive reflections, or maybe stories about his early days laying foundations in the city. I was wrong. The pages were covered in rigid geometric columns drawn with a ruler. The ink was dark and precise. Instead of memories, I found rows of alphanumeric codes, long strings of routing numbers mapped out across the grid, dates stretching back over a decade. It was a financial map. I turned the crisp pages slowly. My grandfather had mapped out every dollar that moved through the Cook family orbit. He tracked the origin of his wealth, and more importantly, he tracked where the leaks were hidden. About a third of the way through the book, a specific entry stopped my hand. The ink here was pressed harder into the paper, as if he had gripped the pen with frustration when he wrote it. The date was exactly 6 years ago. Beside a sequence of bank routing numbers was a brief handwritten note. Gregory loan, 200,000, never repaid. I stared at the words. My father, Gregory Cook, spent his entire adult life walking around the local country club acting like a self-made titan. He loved to hold court at the golf course, bragging about his sharp business acumen and his independent success. He always looked down on my teaching career, calling it a noble but financially pathetic choice. He told everyone who would listen that he built his luxury lifestyle with his own 2 hands. Yet here was the truth written in stark black ink. When his spending outpaced his actual income, he went to his father with his hand out. He took a staggering sum of money and simply kept it. He was a fraud. My stomach turned. I realized the smug look of satisfaction on my father's face in the lawyer's office was not just about the $10 million. It was about pure relief. He thought the only person who knew his shameful secret was buried in the ground. While I was deciphering the columns of numbers, my phone vibrated against the table. The screen lit up, showing an incoming email. The sender was Jessica. She was not checking in to see if I was okay after the sterile reading. She was not offering condolences. The subject line read, "Notice of vacancy, action required." I tapped the screen. The message opened with a formal letterhead from a prominent real estate attorney in town. It was an official 14-day eviction notice. Below the dense legal jargon, Jessica had attached a brief personal message. "Hey Kim, the realtor says the lake lot is prime for commercial development. I am putting the property on the market first thing Monday morning. You need to clear your belongings out by the end of the month. Let me know if you need me to send you some moving boxes." She sent that email less than 2 hours after the will reading concluded. My grandfather was barely resting, and my sister was already pacing the dimensions of my living room, calculating her profit margins. She assumed that inheriting the primary estate meant she inherited everything he ever touched. In her mind, I was just a squatter taking up space on her new investment property. $10 million was not enough to satisfy her. She had to take my home too. Most people would panic. Most people would call their parents begging for an intervention or an extension. I did not shed a single tear. I did not dial her number. 12 years of being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family had burned the panic out of me. I put the phone down and turned my attention back to the battered notebook. My grandfather left me this ledger for a specific reason. I flipped past the banking details and moved toward the back half of the book. The columns here changed. They were no longer tracking liquid money. They were tracking property. I scanned the pages looking for familiar numbers. It took me 10 minutes to find the local county parcel code for the cabin. It was recorded neatly on a page dated 5 years ago. The exact year my grandfather handed me the keys and told me to make a life here. I traced my finger across the row. The entry listed the parcel code, the property tax identification, and the holding entity. I expected to see the William Cook Personal Trust. That was the main umbrella that held the $10 million and the primary assets Jessica just inherited. But the ink told a very different story. The holding entity column listed a name I had never seen before: Cedar and Pine LLC. I scanned the adjacent pages. The LLC did not just hold the cabin. It held commercial properties in Traverse City. It held unlisted bank accounts. It held the very ground my sister thought she was standing on. My grandfather had quietly severed this property from his main estate years before he died. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the wind rattling the glass panes. Jessica's eviction notice was sitting in my inbox, demanding I leave a property she believed she owned. But Jessica only inherited the personal estate. She did not inherit Cedar and Pine LLC. She had no legal authority to sell the dirt under my feet. The notebook sitting on my kitchen table was the only physical record proving the corporate structure existed. My sister was about to list a piece of real estate she had zero claim to. She was walking blindfolded toward a cliff, and she was daring me to push her. I picked up a pen and started taking notes. My family wanted a war over money. They were about to get one over the law. I called the school principal at 6 in the morning and requested a substitute teacher for my first period history class. I used my only personal day of the semester. I packed a thermos of black coffee, grabbed the leather notebook from the kitchen counter, and left the cabin before the sun broke over the tree line. The drive north to Traverse City took 3 hours. The highway unrolled in long gray ribbons, flanked by dense pine forests and cold inland lakes. My grandfather always preferred the quiet rhythm of the northern Lower Peninsula. He claimed the crisp air up here kept his mind sharp away from the noise of the city. I kept the ledger secured on the passenger seat. Page 3 held a sequence of routing numbers belonging to a regional credit union off Front Street. It was not a major national bank with sleek, modern architecture. It was a modest brick building wedged between a local bakery and a hardware store. I parked my Honda near the back entrance. The morning air carried the scent of roasted coffee and exhaust. I walked through the glass double doors. The lobby was quiet. A few older patrons sat in velvet chairs reading the local newspaper. I approached the teller counter and placed my driver license on the laminate surface. I read the routing number from the notebook to the woman behind the glass. She typed the sequence into her terminal. Her fingers stopped moving over the keyboard. She looked up at my face and then back at the screen. "Give me 1 moment, please," she said. She walked away and knocked on a frosted glass door marked Branch Manager. A tall man with graying temples stepped out. He wore a crisp blue suit and a genuine warm smile. He walked straight toward me, extending his hand. "Miss Cook," he said. "My name is David. William told me you would come." I took his hand. He did not ask for further identification. He led me past the tellers and down a narrow carpeted hallway toward the steel vault. "Your grandfather was a good friend. he continued, his voice echoing slightly against the metal walls. He set this box up 5 years ago. He paid the rental fees a decade in advance. He gave me strict instructions that only you were allowed access. No lawyers, no family members, just Kimberly. David unlocked the heavy steel gate and directed me to a small private viewing room. He placed a long metal box on the table and handed me a single brass key. "Take your time," he said, closing the door behind him. The room was silent. I inserted the brass key into the lock and turned it. The lid creaked open. Inside rested 2 items: a sleek silver flash drive and a crisp white business card. I picked up the card. The embossed black lettering read, "Evelyn Sterling, Trust Attorney." Below her name was a phone number and an address in Lansing. There were no other instructions. I pocketed the card and the drive, closing the metal box. I thanked David and walked back out into the cold northern air. Sitting in the driver's seat of my car, I locked the doors. I booted up my laptop, resting it on the steering wheel. I plugged the silver drive into the side port. A single folder appeared on my screen labeled Cedar and Pine. I clicked it. The screen filled with PDF documents, legal charters, and bank statements. I opened the leather notebook and laid it across the center console. I spent the next hour cross-referencing the physical handwritten codes with the digital legal files. The numbers lined up perfectly. William Cook had built a fortress. Cedar and Pine LLC was the true vault, holding the vast majority of his wealth. The commercial real estate, the hidden accounts, and my lake house were all legally bound to this entity. But what about the $10 million Jessica inherited? I opened a document titled Personal Estate Contingencies. The text was dense legal jargon, but the structure was clear. The $10 million my sister celebrated was a shell account. It was a decoy trust. The funds existed, but they were locked behind a wall of strict behavioral stipulations. My grandfather knew exactly who my parents raised Jessica to be. He knew she measured her worth in dollar signs and designer labels. He engineered a financial test. While I read the clause, my phone vibrated against the cup holder. A text message from Jessica lit up the screen. The preview notification showed multiple exclamation points. I opened the message thread. The tone was frantic. "Hey, do you have any alternate paperwork from the lawyer? Did the estate office give you any other account numbers? Call me right now." I stared at the glowing screen. A second text arrived a moment later. "I am at the Porsche dealership and my new estate debit card just declined. The manager is looking at me like I am a criminal. Why is the account frozen? Answer me." I read her words twice. My sister drove straight to a luxury car dealership the moment the banks opened. She tried to buy a high-end vehicle using an account she assumed was loaded with unlimited cash. She hit a brick wall. The waiting period the lawyer mentioned during the sterile reading was not just bureaucratic red tape, it was an active freeze. I turned my attention back to the PDF on my laptop screen. The legal language outlined the exact nature of the freeze. The primary estate funds would remain inaccessible until the beneficiary proved responsible stewardship. More importantly, the account would permanently lock if the beneficiary engaged in hostile financial actions against other family members during the probationary period. Jessica sending me an eviction notice to throw me out of my home was a hostile financial action. By trying to sell the ground under my feet, my sister triggered the very trap designed to stop her. My phone buzzed again. This time, my father was calling. Gregory was likely standing next to her in the dealership showroom, sweating through his golf shirt, while the finance manager ran the declined card for a third time. I pressed the red button and sent his call straight to voicemail. For 31 years, I played the role of the quiet sister. I let them take the spotlight. I let them claim the success. I sat in the background grading papers and paying my own bills while they lived on borrowed money and unearned arrogance. They always thought my silence was a sign of weakness. They never considered it might be a strategy. I pulled the crisp white business card out of my coat pocket. Evelyn Sterling, Trust Attorney. My grandfather gave me the map, and now he gave me the guide. I was no longer the marginalized daughter sitting in the corner of a glass conference room. I held the master key to the Cook family empire. I picked up my phone and typed the Lansing area code into the keypad. I pressed the green call button and held the speaker to my ear, listening to the line ring. The quiet sister was gone. The architect of their downfall was ready to begin. I drove back from Traverse City with the windows down, letting the cold wind off the lake clear my head. The northern highway was mostly empty, giving me time to process the sheer weight of the information hidden inside the silver flash drive. When I turned my Honda onto the familiar dirt road leading to my home, the afternoon shadows were growing long across the pine needles. A sleek black luxury sports utility vehicle was parked near my front porch. I recognized the custom chrome rims and the tinted windows immediately. It was my parents. Gregory and Susan Cook did not visit the lake house. In the 5 years since my grandfather handed me the keys, they crossed my threshold exactly 0 times. Susan always claimed the gravel driveway ruined her expensive Italian leather shoes. Gregory told everyone the rustling trees and the damp air gave him a migraine. They preferred their sterile country club dining rooms and manicured suburban lawns. Their sudden physical presence in my driveway was a glaring siren. I parked my dusty sedan next to their pristine vehicle. I took a deep breath, grabbed the heavy leather notebook from the passenger seat, and tucked it deep inside my canvas tote bag. My mother stood on the wooden deck holding a white bakery box tied with a bright red ribbon. She wore a beige cashmere sweater, tailored slacks, and an eager, practiced smile. My father stood beside her, scrolling rapidly through his phone with a tight jaw. When he heard my footsteps on the wooden stairs, he shoved the device into his coat pocket and forced the muscles in his face to relax. "Kimberly, sweetheart," Susan called out, her voice pitched a full octave higher than her normal speaking tone. "We decided to take a spontaneous drive up the coast today. We wanted to check on you after the reading this morning. We know how overwhelming legal matters can be for you." She held out the white bakery box. "I brought your favorite," she said. "A deep dish cherry pie from that little artisan bakery downtown." I stared at the cardboard container. My mother carried a cherry pie 3 hours north to comfort me. I am severely allergic to cherries. When I was 9 years old, a single bite of a fruit tart sent me to the emergency room with a closed throat and a soaring fever. Susan was sitting right next to my hospital bed, complaining loudly to a nurse about missing her semi-final tennis match. Decades later, she still remembered the tennis score, but forgot the specific allergen that nearly stopped her youngest daughter from breathing. She performed the role of a loving mother using a prop that could literally put me back in a hospital bed. "Thank you, Susan," I said. My voice betrayed zero emotion. I unlocked the front door and pushed it open, letting them inside. I did not offer to take their coats. I did not invite them to sit down on the sofa. The cabin felt instantly suffocating. Gregory paced near the stone fireplace, inspecting the rustic masonry with a highly critical eye. Susan placed the lethal pastry on my kitchen island and smoothed her cashmere sleeves, avoiding the dust settling on the counter. The silence in the room stretched thin and brittle. I walked over to the sink and poured myself a glass of tap water, waiting for them to play their hand. "Your sister had a bit of a stressful morning," Gregory began. He leaned against the wooden mantel, trying to project a casual, relaxed posture. "There was a minor administrative error with her new estate debit card. The bank is being ridiculous about releasing the primary liquid funds. The teller mentioned some archaic security protocols William put in place before his passing." He paused, waiting for me to offer sympathy or ask a question. I simply took a slow sip of water. "Anyway," Susan chimed in, walking closer to the kitchen sink. "Jessica spoke with the senior estate manager. He mentioned that your grandfather used a physical codebook to authorize certain asset transfers, a leather ledger, the exact one the lawyer gave you this morning at the office. The facade was so thin it was insulting. They did not drive 3 hours to check on my emotional well-being. They drove here because Jessica suffered a public humiliation at the luxury car dealership. The bank told her the $10 million was frozen solid. When she demanded immediate access, the financial officer likely explained that overriding the freeze required the cryptographic keys held in the physical master ledger. The junk notebook they mocked a few hours ago was suddenly the only bridge standing between them and their unearned wealth. "We were hoping you could hand it over to us," Susan said. Her polite smile strained at the edges, revealing the tension underneath. It really belongs in the main family archive back in Grand Rapids. Jessica is setting up a beautiful memorial display in her new living room. It would be an absolute shame to leave such a sentimental family heirloom gathering dust out here in the woods. I set my glass down on the counter. The water sloshed against the glass rim. You want to put his private financial ledger in a decorative display case, I asked? Gregory stepped away from the stone fireplace. His casual posture vanished instantly. We need the book, Kim, he said, dropping the gentle father routine. The estate is locked down until we can verify the holding company codes. Jessica cannot access a single dime of her money. Your grandfather was losing his mind toward the end and made things unnecessarily complicated. Give me the notebook right now so we can fix this mess. I looked at the man who claimed he could not afford to pay my college tuition while funding a lavish destination wedding. I looked at the woman who brought poison into my kitchen, pretending it was a gift. They stood in my home demanding I surrender the only protection I possessed. No, I said. The single syllable hung heavy in the cold air. Excuse me, Susan blinked, her perfectly manicured eyelashes fluttering rapidly. I said no. The notebook was left to me. It is my legal property. You are not putting it in a fake archive, and you are not handing it over to the bank. Gregory crossed the room, his heavy boots thudding hard against the floorboards. The veins in his neck pushed tightly against his shirt collar. You listen to me, you ungrateful brat, he snapped. His voice filled the small cabin, bouncing sharply off the cedar walls. You have always done this. Every single time your sister is about to achieve something, you find a way to ruin it. You were jealous of her wedding. You are jealous of her inheritance. I am not asking you for permission. I am telling you to give me the ledger right now. 12 years ago, I would have shrunk away from his booming anger. I would have handed over the canvas bag just to keep the peace. I would have apologized for taking up space in his world. But the woman standing in the kitchen today was no longer that frightened, isolated girl. I was the legally appointed owner of Cedar and Pine. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch away from his shadow. I let a long, dead quiet settle over the room. I weaponized my silence, making him stew in the echo of his own outburst. I looked him dead in the eyes and pointed my finger toward the front door. Get out of my house, I said. My tone was flat and unmovable. Susan gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Gregory took a threatening step forward, raising his arm, but he stopped abruptly. The absolute lack of fear in my posture confused him. Men who rule through intimidation do not know how to react when their target refuses to cower. He lowered his hand, his face turning a dark shade of red. You are making a fatal error, Gregory growled. You think holding on to that old book makes you special. It makes you a target. We will have our lawyers drag you through probate court until you are penniless. I will see you in court then, I replied. Now leave before I call the county sheriff and report a trespass. Susan grabbed his sleeve, pulling him toward the exit. She threw a final, disgusted glare over her shoulder before walking out into the cold. The heavy wooden door slammed shut, rattling the window frames. I watched through the glass panes as they climbed back into their sleek vehicle. The tires spun, spraying gravel into the grass as they sped down the driveway and disappeared into the tree line. I stood in the quiet kitchen, listening to the engine fade. My hands were perfectly steady. I pulled the canvas tote bag onto the counter and removed the leather notebook. I rolled the brass dials to 1998 and popped the lock. Why was Gregory so furious? Why was he willing to threaten his own daughter over a frozen bank account that technically belonged to Jessica? He was a proud man who cared about his public image above all else. Driving 3 hours to beg for a book was an act of extreme desperation. I sat at the kitchen island and flipped past the property deeds. I bypassed the main estate codes. I stopped at a section near the back titled Business Expenditures. My grandfather ran his construction firm with an iron grip. He tracked every lumber purchase and every payroll check. I scanned the rigid rows. About halfway down a page dated 8 years ago, a distinct red ink caught my eye. It was different from the neat black columns covering the rest of the ledger. The entry detailed a corporate account transfer. $200,000 was moved from the primary corporate payroll account to an offshore holding fund. Beside the transaction was a note written in the unmistakable jagged cursive of my grandfather. Gregory authorized wire transfer without consent. Fraudulent vendor invoice used. Corporate theft. I stopped breathing. The note from the first cipher earlier today mentioned a loan that was never repaid. I thought my father had simply borrowed money and failed to return it. I was wrong. The entry staring back at me proved my father did not ask for a loan. He fabricated fake construction invoices and embezzled $200,000 straight out of his own father's corporate payroll. My grandfather knew. He tracked the stolen funds. He kept the hard evidence secured in this exact ledger. The statute of limitations on corporate embezzlement at this financial level stretched for decades. My parents did not drive to the lake house because Jessica wanted to buy a luxury car. They came because the estate lawyer likely told them the full corporate audit would trigger the moment the primary trust unlocked. They needed the notebook to destroy the evidence before the auditors found it. They were not just greedy. They were terrified of going to federal prison. I closed the heavy leather cover and locked the brass latch. My family came out here to intimidate a high school history teacher. They had no idea they just handed me a loaded weapon. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my wooden kitchen table watching the darkness slowly lift over Lake Michigan. The red ink proving my father committed federal embezzlement burned into my memory. For years, Gregory paraded around his country club demanding respect and lecturing me on the value of hard work. The entire time, his luxury lifestyle was built on fabricated corporate invoices and stolen payroll funds. By 8 in the morning, I was back in my Honda driving south toward Lansing. The state capital was roughly 2 hours away, depending on the morning traffic. I needed legal armor and I needed it fast. The address printed on the crisp white business card led me away from the towering government buildings and into a quiet industrial district near the river. Evelyn Sterling did not operate out of a flashy high-rise with expensive modern art in the lobby. Her firm was located inside a repurposed brick warehouse. A simple brass plaque beside the entrance displayed her name. I took the vintage freight elevator to the 3rd floor. The receptionist was a quiet young man who simply nodded when I gave him my name. He directed me down a narrow hallway, illuminated by warm amber lights. Evelyn waited for me inside a corner office lined with towering bookshelves. She was a striking woman in her late 50s. Her silver hair was pulled back into a severe practical knot at the nape of her neck. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer and simple pearl earrings. Her eyes were calculating, assessing every detail of my posture as I walked through the door. She did not offer me a cup of coffee or a forced smile. She pointed a manicured finger toward an armchair positioned opposite her heavy mahogany desk. "You found the ledger," she stated. Her voice was precise and measured, stripping away any unnecessary pleasantries. I unzipped my canvas tote bag and retrieved the battered book, placing it gently on the polished wood surface. Evelyn looked at the tarnished brass lock with a strange mixture of profound respect and lingering sorrow. "Your grandfather was a brilliant strategist, Kimberly," she began. "He built a construction empire in an industry famous for breaking weak men. But his greatest underlying fear was watching his own blood dismantle his legacy out of pure greed." She opened a thick manila folder resting on her desk. The documents inside were covered in dense legal text. 5 years ago, William scheduled a private consultation in this exact room, Evelyn continued. He suspected Gregory and Susan were quietly siphoning corporate revenue to sustain their lavish habits. He also watched how they raised Jessica to view wealth as a bludgeon rather than a responsibility. He knew giving them unfettered access to his actual net worth would destroy the company and leave you out in the cold. So he hired me to execute a silent structural maneuver. Evelyn tapped a fountain pen against the open folder. He transferred his commercial real estate, the Liquid Capital, and your lake house into Cedar and Pine LLC. He drained his personal estate, leaving only a fraction behind. I leaned forward, gripping the armrests of my chair. Processing the magnitude of this legal revelation felt like trying to drink from a fire hose. "What about the $10 million the other lawyer announced at the reading?" I asked. Evelyn offered a thin, grim smile. A masterclass in misdirection, she replied. That account is a shell. It functions as a behavioral honeypot. The trust document dictates those funds will only activate if Jessica and your parents pass a rigid character clause during a 30-day probationary window. They must demonstrate familial loyalty and strictly refrain from hostile financial actions against you. If they fail the test, the decoy trust instantly dissolves, and the money reverts directly into the LLC. I pulled up the eviction notice email on my phone and slid the glowing screen across the desk. Jessica sent this 2 hours after the reading concluded, I said. My father also drove to my house yesterday, demanding I surrender the ledger. Evelyn read the harsh words written by my sister. She nodded slowly, her eyes flashing with a mix of satisfaction and dread. By attempting an illegal eviction and trying to extort you for the physical codes, they are failing the character test in spectacular fashion. The decoy trust is currently self-destructing. She picked up the leather notebook, weighing it carefully in her hands. She explained the true nature of the trap. Cedar and Pine is an anonymous entity structured around original bearer shares. It is an archaic but ironclad instrument. That means whoever holds the physical certificates and the matching cryptographic ledger codes legally controls the entire empire. William bound the legal existence of the LLC directly into the pages of this book. You do not just have an account number. You are holding the corporate crown jewels. A sharp buzz from the desk intercom interrupted our conversation. The receptionist announced an urgent incoming fax from a law firm in Grand Rapids. Evelyn pressed a silver button and a printed sheet slid out of a machine near the window. She read the document and her jaw tightened visibly. The stakes just elevated, she warned, handing me the paper. It was a formal notice of impending litigation. The letterhead belonged to a notorious firm known across the state for aggressive, sleazy tactics. Your father hired Marcus Vance, Evelyn explained. Her tone carried a genuine edge of warning. He is a courtroom mercenary in a cheap suit. He specializes in breaking trusts by burying opponents in frivolous lawsuits and manufactured fraud claims. Marcus does not care about ethics or truth. He cares about crushing innocent people under a mountain of legal fees until they surrender. Gregory is paying him to tear the estate apart and drag you through a decade of probate hell. Evelyn looked me directly in the eyes, refusing to let me look away. Marcus Vance will advise your family to stop playing polite immediately. They are desperate. They know the corporate auditors will eventually discover Gregory embezzling payroll funds once the primary accounts are scrutinized. They need the ledger to erase their financial crimes and secure the LLC before the authorities get involved. They will stop at nothing to take that book from you, Kimberly. They will use intimidation, blackmail, and physical force if necessary. This is no longer a petty squabble over a will. This is a high-stakes corporate war. I looked down at the litigation notice resting on my lap. My parents were willing to destroy my life to hide their own failures. They were willing to unleash a legal predator to strip away my home and my future. I felt a cold knot of determination form in my chest. I slid the paper back across the desk. Where do I sign? I asked. Evelyn produced a stack of retainer agreements from her bottom drawer. I signed my name in black ink, officially stepping into the role of the estate architect. I was no longer a victim waiting for the next blow. I was a client with a formidable champion. I thanked Evelyn and carried my canvas bag back to the vintage elevator. The Lansing air felt heavy with impending rain as I walked out of the brick building. The sky was turning a dark, bruised purple, signaling an afternoon storm. I unlocked my Honda and tossed the heavy bag onto the passenger seat. Before I could turn the ignition key, my phone chimed with a missed call notification. I pressed the screen to check the voicemail. The audio playback started filling the quiet cabin of my car. It was Brad. His voice sounded entirely different than it did in the sterile conference room. The arrogant country club tone was stripped away, replaced by something raw, cold, and deeply dangerous. The audio crackled over my car speakers, carrying a menacing echo. We know you went to a lawyer today, Kim. Marcus told us about the holding company. We know you have the real documents. We are done playing nice, and we are done asking for permission. We are coming over. The message ended with a harsh electronic click. I sat alone in the parking lot, listening to the rain begin to strike my windshield. My brother-in-law was driving toward my home, and he was not bringing a cherry pie. The drive back to the lake house felt like navigating a tunnel. Rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the oncoming headlights. Brad left a chilling promise on my voicemail, but my newly appointed attorney taught me how to analyze their strategy. Marcus Vance was a courtroom mercenary. A sleazy lawyer manipulating the board would never allow his clients to commit a felony breaking and entering while he was trying to legally contest a trust. Vance likely intercepted my furious brother-in-law pulling his leash tight. He needed clean paper trails, not police reports. I spent the night sitting in my dark living room watching the driveway. The shadows remained empty. The storm passed by dawn, leaving behind clear skies and a buzzing phone. The text message arrived at 7 in the morning. It was from Jessica. Her tone shifted dramatically from her previous frantic emails. She sounded measured, polite, and deeply rehearsed. Kim, I know emotions are running hot right now. Dad and Brad overreacted yesterday. We are family, and we should handle this like adults. Meet me at the roasting room downtown at noon. Let us find a fair solution. She chose an artisanal cafe in the wealthiest district of Grand Rapids. The establishment featured exposed brick walls, hanging Edison bulbs, and imported leather booths. A single cup of pour-over coffee cost more than my hourly teaching wage. It was her home turf, a place designed to make people without extreme wealth feel instantly out of place. She wanted me off balance. I arrived 15 minutes early. I found a corner table near the tall front windows and sat down, unzipping my coat. The barista behind the marble counter ignored me, serving businessmen in tailored suits. I did not approach the register. I watched the street outside. Jessica walked through the heavy glass door 10 minutes late. She wore a pristine camel hair trench coat over a designer silk blouse. A structured leather handbag dangled from the crook of her arm. She radiated an aura of unearned privilege, stepping past the line of waiting customers, as if the rules did not apply to her. She spotted me in the corner and pasted a wide, benevolent smile across her face. She approached the table, pulling out the chair opposite me. She signaled the barista with a flick of her wrist, ordering a complicated iced espresso beverage with oat milk and vanilla syrup. The server brought her drink on a small porcelain saucer. Jessica reached into her designer handbag and handed the barista a crisp $20 bill, waving away the change. She took a slow sip through a paper straw. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not offer to buy me a cup of black drip coffee. She let me sit with empty hands while she drank her expensive luxury beverage. It was a tiny, calculated insult. A pebble of disrespect designed to establish a clear hierarchy. This place is so charming. Jessica began setting her glass on the wooden table. Brad and I come here on Sunday mornings. The owner imports these beans directly from a private farm in Colombia. I remained silent. I kept my posture relaxed, leaning back against the wooden chair. Jessica sighed, adopting a tone of profound sisterly concern. Look, Kim, I know the last few days have been tense. Dad gets hot-headed when he is stressed, and Brad is just fiercely protective of our future. But I told them both to back off. I told them you are my little sister and I want to take care of you. We do not need a messy legal battle over a dusty old book and a rundown cabin. It is tearing our parents apart. She reached into her structured handbag and produced a thick manila envelope. She untied the string closure and pulled out 2 items. The first was a single sheet of paper covered in dense legal paragraphs. The second was a rectangular slip of blue bank paper. She slid both items across the table. I know teaching does not pay well, Jessica continued, her voice dripping with artificial pity. I know you are still drowning in those student loans. I want to help you start fresh somewhere new, somewhere better than that drafty old house in the woods. I looked down at the table. The blue slip was a certified cashier check printed with my legal name. The amount read $50,000. Jessica leaned forward, lowering her voice like we were sharing a wonderful secret. It is a gift, Kim. No strings attached. You sign this simple release form, handing over the ledger and agreeing to vacate the lake house by the end of the month. You take the $50,000 and you walk away free and clear. You can pay off your loans. You can put a down payment on a nice little condo closer to your school. You deserve a break. For a brief second, I imagined the woman I used to be sitting in this chair. The exhausted, underpaid teacher who spent every evening calculating grocery budgets on the back of electric bills. That version of me might have looked at $50,000 and cried tears of gratitude. She might have grabbed the pen and signed her rights away just to escape the crushing weight of debt. Jessica was banking on my historical desperation. She was relying on my financial exhaustion. But Jessica's arrogance blinded her to the present reality. She assumed she was outsmarting a naive sibling. She did not know I spent the previous day inside a Traverse City vault and a Lansing law firm. I ignored the glowing blue check and picked up the printed contract. The title at the top read, Release of Miscellaneous Sentimental Items. I read the document with the analytical precision of an academic grading a term paper. Marcus Vance drafted this form. The language was deceptively simple in the opening paragraphs, framing the notebook as a valueless family keepsake. But the trap was buried in the fourth stanza near the bottom margin. The clause was written in tight, dense text. By surrendering the physical ledger, the signee willfully forfeits any and all rights, titles, interests, or claims to corporate entities associated, mapped, or referenced within the provided materials, including but not limited to Cedar and Pine Limited Liability Company. My sister was offering me $50,000 to permanently sign away a corporate empire worth more than her entire decoy inheritance. She was trying to buy the crown jewels for the price of a used sedan. I set the paper back on the table. I picked up the certified check, holding it between my index and middle finger. Jessica smiled, her eyes gleaming with anticipated victory. She thought she won. I pushed the blue slip across the smooth wood, sliding it directly back toward her designer handbag. I do not need your allowance, Jessica, I said. My voice was calm, quiet, and entirely devoid of fear. The practiced smile fractured. Her perfectly outlined lips parted in sheer confusion. Excuse me, she whispered. I tapped the dense paragraph near the bottom of the contract. You need to tell Marcus Vance to write better bait, I continued. This clause releases my ownership of Cedar and Pine, the holding company that owns the Traverse City commercial properties, the holding company that owns my cabin. I am not selling my corporate assets for pennies so you can fix your frozen bank accounts. The color drained from her face. The realization that I understood the true structure of our grandfather's wealth hit her like a physical blow. The benevolent older sister routine evaporated. The polished facade shattered, revealing the ugly, frantic greed underneath. She slammed her hands flat against the table, causing her iced espresso to rattle against the porcelain saucer. Are you insane? She hissed. Her volume rose, drawing the attention of a nearby businessman. You are a public school teacher, Kim. You grade history papers for teenagers. You do not know how to run a corporation. You are holding up my money out of pure spite. Her pitch continued to climb, echoing off the exposed brick walls. You have always been a jealous loser. You are trying to steal what belongs to me because you have nothing of your own. Take the money and sign the paper before my lawyer buries you. The cafe fell silent. The barista stopped steaming milk. A woman at the next booth turned around to stare. Jessica was breathing hard, her face flushed unevenly under her expensive cosmetics. She was throwing a public tantrum in the middle of her favorite high society establishment. I stood up slowly, buttoning my coat. I did not match her hysteria. I simply looked down at the woman who spent her entire life stepping on my shoulders to elevate herself. You are going to need that $50,000 to pay your legal fees, Jess, I said. I turned my back on her and walked toward the exit. I did not rush. I kept my head high, feeling the eyes of the quiet room tracking my departure. Jessica shouted my name once more, but I pushed through the heavy glass doors, letting the cold street air wash over me. I stood on the sidewalk outside the roasting room, pulling my phone from my pocket. I dialed the Lansing area code. Evelyn Sterling answered on the second ring. They tried to buy me out, I said, keeping my pace steady as I walked toward my car. They used Marcus Vance to draft a fraudulent release form, hiding the LLC transfer in the fine print. Evelyn let out a low, sharp hum of approval. They are playing sloppy, she replied. They are rushing their moves because the corporate audit window is closing. Did you sign anything? I did not even drink their coffee, I answered. Good. Evelyn stated, her voice hardening into steel. The negotiation phase is officially over. It is time to set the trap. I drove away from the coffee shop, leaving Jessica to simmer in her public humiliation. The highway stretched out before me, leading back toward the quiet isolation of the lake house. The adrenaline from our confrontation slowly faded, replacing the initial shock with a cold, calculating focus. My sister tried to execute a cheap legal trick to steal my corporate assets. She failed because she underestimated my preparation. But her desperate maneuver proved Evelyn Sterling was right. My family was running out of time and they were making mistakes. When I unlocked my front door, the cabin greeted me with profound silence. I hung my coat on the brass hook in the hallway and walked straight to the wooden desk in the corner of the living room. The heavy leather notebook sat exactly where I left it. I ran my fingertips over the worn cover. Earlier today, I used this ledger as a shield to deflect a fraudulent contract. Now I needed to understand the true depth of the secrets buried inside its pages. I needed to know exactly why my parents were willing to unleash a courtroom predator to destroy my life. I sat in the heavy oak chair and rolled the brass dials to the unlock sequence. The latch clicked open. I bypassed the holding company deeds and the recent corporate banking codes. I flipped backward, diving into the middle section of the book. The dates here stretched further into the past, reaching a timeline where my grandfather still actively managed the day-to-day finances of his construction empire. I scanned the neat columns of numbers and dates. I was looking for the era covering my late teenage years. I wanted to see how the Cook family wealth flowed while I was growing up. My index finger paused over a page dated exactly 12 years ago. It was the spring of my senior year in high school. The entry documented a direct withdrawal from a secure personal trust account. The numerical figure written in dark black ink stopped the breath in my throat. $80,000. Beside the staggering amount was a brief explanatory note. The cursive letters were pressed firmly into the paper. Given to Gregory for Kimberly college tuition. I stared at the sentence until the letters blurred. I dropped the heavy ledger onto the desk. The thick leather cover struck the wood with a dull thud, echoing through the quiet room. My mind snapped back 12 years. I remembered sitting at the polished granite island in my parents' sprawling suburban kitchen. I held an acceptance letter from my dream university. I was 18 years old and vibrating with excitement. Gregory stood on the opposite side of the counter holding a cup of expensive imported coffee. He wore a grave expression. He set his mug down and delivered a rehearsed speech about the harsh realities of the modern economy. He told me the construction market was experiencing a downturn. He claimed his business margins were too tight to afford university expenses. "You are a smart girl, Kim," he had said. "You need to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. We cannot fund your education. You will have to take out loans like everyone else." I believed him. I signed the suffocating promissory notes. I chained myself to a decade of crushing debt. During my undergraduate years, I worked double shifts at a diner, smelling like stale grease while trying to study for historical theory exams. I graduated exhausted. For the past 9 years, I lived on a strict budget, dedicating a huge portion of my public school salary to the monthly minimum payments. I drove a used Honda. I skipped vacations. I measured every grocery purchase. A month after I signed those loan papers, Jessica announced her engagement. My parents threw her a lavish destination wedding at a luxury ski resort in Aspen. I remembered standing in the freezing snow wearing a cheap bridesmaid dress while waiters circulated with silver trays of imported champagne. Jessica wore a custom silk gown tailored in Europe. There were towering ice sculptures and a 5-course dinner. During the reception, Gregory stood up and delivered a tearful toast to the crowded ballroom. He bragged about sparing no expense for his eldest daughter. He did not pay for that wedding with his own money. He paid for it with my future. My grandfather gave Gregory $80,000 specifically earmarked for my education. My father intercepted the funds. He stole the money meant to secure my foundation and used it to purchase ice sculptures and luxury hotel suites for my sister. They forced me into a decade of financial hardship to fund a party. A deep, profound physical heat spread through my chest. The betrayal was not just a recent reaction to an inheritance. The betrayal was systemic. It was woven into the very fabric of my adulthood. They did not just view me as an obstacle to wealth. They viewed me as a resource to be plundered. The motivation driving my actions shifted in that exact moment. Yesterday I was operating out of self-preservation. I wanted to protect the lake house and honor the legacy my grandfather entrusted to me. Now the goal line moved. This was no longer just about guarding cedar and pine. It was about reclaiming the life my family stole from me. They robbed me of a carefree college experience. They robbed me of financial stability. Righteous anger crystallized in my mind, forming a sharp, undeniable weapon. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my phone. I turned on the bright, articulating lamp sitting on the corner of my desk. I positioned the light to cast a clear, even glow across the yellowed pages of the ledger. I held the camera lens directly over the book, ensuring the focus was sharp. The shutter clicked loudly in the quiet room. I took a photograph of the date. I took a photograph of the routing sequence. I captured the exact note detailing the $80,000 withdrawal. I flipped forward and photographed the other fraudulent corporate transfer I found the previous night. I opened my email application and attached the high-resolution images to a new message. I typed Evelyn Sterling into the recipient line. I kept the subject line simple: embezzlement and theft. Please verify. I hit send. The progress bar shot across the screen, carrying the physical evidence of their crimes through the digital network. My phone chimed 3 minutes later. It was a text message from Evelyn. The response was brief and chilling. Images received. I am forwarding these routing numbers to our forensic accounting team immediately. We will pull the corresponding bank records to establish a verifiable paper trail. They are trapped. I set the phone face down on the desk. I closed the leather notebook and spun the brass dials, scrambling the lock. The truth was secure. The legal machinery was moving. My family thought they could bully me into submission, but they were about to face the uncompromising weight of forensic evidence. The afternoon stretched into early evening. The sky outside the cabin windows faded from a crisp blue to a deep, bruised purple. The wind died down, leaving the woods surrounding my property perfectly still. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I sat in the gathering darkness, sipping a glass of water and listening to the familiar, settling groans of the cedar walls. My brother-in-law left a threat on my voicemail yesterday, warning me they were coming over. The failed buyout attempt at the coffee shop earlier today likely shattered whatever patience they had left. Jessica would have called Gregory the moment I walked out of the roasting room. She would have told him that I knew about the LLC. The realization that their polite manipulation tactics failed would push them into a corner. Animals act unpredictably when they are backed into a corner. I walked into the kitchen to rinse my glass in the sink. As I turned off the faucet, my eyes caught a sudden shift in the shadows outside the window. Twin beams of stark yellow light pierced the dense tree line at the edge of my property. The lights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the trunks of the ancient white pines. A large vehicle turned off the main county highway and began moving slowly down my private gravel driveway. The heavy crunch of tires rolling over the dirt echoed through the silent woods. I stepped back from the glass, keeping my body hidden in the shadows of the kitchen. The family realized financial manipulation would not work. The legal threats did not make me flinch. Now they were escalating to physical intimidation. The headlights grew brighter, casting long, distorted shadows across my wooden porch. The real fight was about to begin. The twin beams of harsh yellow light extinguished, leaving the dirt driveway plunged back into rural darkness. The digital clock on my microwave glowed a faint green, displaying exactly 11 at night. I remained perfectly still, leaning against the cold kitchen wall. The heavy engine of the luxury sports utility vehicle idled for a few seconds before shutting off. The driver's side door opened with a quiet metallic click. Footsteps crunched against the loose gravel outside. The intruder did not walk toward the front porch. He was circling around the perimeter of the structure, heading toward the rear deck. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and lowered the screen brightness to its minimum setting. Living alone in an isolated rural area taught me to prioritize my personal safety long before my family declared war. Months ago, I skipped several grocery runs to afford a sophisticated wireless surveillance system. 4 high-definition lenses were mounted discreetly under the wooden eaves of the roof. A fifth device monitored the interior living room from a high vantage point above the stone mantel. I opened the security application on my phone. The live video feed loaded instantly, rendering the dark woods in crisp, monochromatic infrared vision. A tall figure moved onto the back deck. He wore a dark hooded sweatshirt pulled low over his forehead, but his posture gave him away immediately. Brad always walked with a distinct, arrogant swagger. He married Jessica 5 years ago, bringing nothing to the union except a recognizable local surname and a closet full of expensive golf attire. His own family drained their generational wealth a decade prior, leaving him desperate to secure a new source of endless funding. He viewed my sister as his permanent meal ticket. Now that her $10 million inheritance was frozen, he was facing personal bankruptcy. That financial panic reduced a supposed high society gentleman into a petty thief skulking through the forest. Brad carried a heavy steel crowbar in his right hand. A compact flashlight rested in his left. He stepped up to the sliding glass door and shined the narrow beam inside, scanning the empty kitchen. He assumed I was a soft target. He believed a public school teacher would be paralyzed by fear, easily intimidated by a broken window and a loud voice. He thought he could break in, steal the leather notebook, and walk out without facing a single consequence. I did not scream. I did not run out the front door. I simply tapped a red icon on my digital screen. The silent panic button triggered an immediate emergency signal to the county sheriff dispatch, detailing an active home invasion at my precise geographic coordinates. Outside, Brad wedged the flat edge of the iron tool between the sliding glass frame and the wooden jamb. He threw his body weight against the handle. The old cedar wood splintered with a sharp cracking sound. The deadbolt gave way, snapping under the extreme mechanical leverage. The glass door slid open, letting a rush of freezing night air enter the cabin. He stepped inside my home. I retreated down the narrow hallway, hiding in the shadows near the bathroom. I kept my eyes fixed on the glowing phone screen, watching his every move through the interior camera feed. Brad swept the flashlight beam across the living area. He bypassed the television and the stereo equipment. He did not care about electronics. He was hunting for the corporate ledger. He walked straight to the wooden desk in the corner. He yanked the top drawer open, flipping through my personal stationery and spare pens. Finding nothing, he moved to the middle drawer, pulling it so hard it detached from the metal tracks, falling onto the floorboards with a loud thud. He kicked the scattered contents aside. His frustration was palpable. He moved toward the tall bookshelves lining the far wall. He began pulling volumes off the shelves, tossing them onto the rug. Hardcover historical biographies and softcover novels piled up at his feet. He shined his light behind the remaining books, searching for a hidden wall safe. The overlap of our conflicts played out perfectly on my screen. Jessica tried to outsmart me with a fraudulent contract this afternoon, and failed. Now her husband was committing a physical felony out of pure desperation. The irony was poetic. Brad thought he was erasing their crimes, but he was actually manufacturing a brand new one. Every smashed drawer and tossed book was recorded in flawless 4,000 pixel resolution. The digital camera captured the distinct logo on his sweatshirt and the frantic gleam in his eyes. He was handing Evelyn Sterling a devastating legal weapon wrapped in a neat high-definition bow. Brad abandoned the bookshelves and returned to the desk. He noticed a manila folder resting near my laptop. He picked it up and opened the cover, shining his beam onto the pages. It contained my annual tax returns and local property assessments. It was useless to him, but he gripped the papers tightly, breathing hard. Before he could toss the folder aside, a silent explosion of red and blue light washed over the cabin windows. The county police arrived without utilizing their audible sirens. They knew the geographic layout of the lake properties and approached quietly to prevent suspects from fleeing into the dense surrounding woods. Twin beams of intense white spotlights pierced the broken sliding door, illuminating the living room like a theater stage. Brad froze. The flashlight slipped from his left hand, clattering against the wooden floorboards. Two uniformed officers stepped onto the rear deck. Their service weapons were drawn and pointed directly through the shattered doorframe. "Drop the metal bar," one officer commanded. His voice was firm, echoing sharply in the cold night air. "Put your hands flat on top of your head and step away from the desk." The heavy crowbar hit the floor. Brad raised his hands, his fingers trembling. The arrogant country club persona evaporated instantly. The reality of a drawn firearm shattered his entitlement. "Wait, there is a misunderstanding here," Brad stammered. His voice cracked, pitching higher in a display of raw panic. "I am not a burglar. I am family. I am the brother-in-law of the property owner." The officers did not lower their weapons. "Turn around and face the wall," the second officer instructed, stepping cautiously into the room. "I swear to you, I am supposed to be here," Brad pleaded, turning his back to the police. His chest heaved as he tried to construct a plausible lie. "My sister-in-law asked me to check on the cabin. The door was already broken when I arrived. I was just looking through these papers to see if anything important was taken. We are a prominent family in Grand Rapids. You can call my wife Jessica." He was trying to leverage his social status to escape a criminal charge. He believed his tailored clothes and his familiar surname would grant him automatic immunity. He thought the rules designed for ordinary citizens did not apply to his bloodline. I locked my phone screen and slid the device into my pocket. I stepped out of the dark hallway and walked into the illuminated living room. The officers shifted their stance slightly, registering my presence, but keeping their primary focus on the intruder. "Mom, are you the homeowner?" the first officer asked. I stopped a few feet away from the desk, looking at the mess scattered across my rug. I looked at the broken doorframe. Then I looked at the man sweating against my wall, holding my personal tax documents. "Yes, officer, I am the legal resident," I replied. My tone was steady and entirely calm. Brad turned his head slightly, trying to catch my eye. "Kim, tell them," he whispered. "Tell them I was just helping you secure the property. Do not make this a big deal. We can handle this privately." He was begging me to save him. The man who left a threatening voicemail promising to take what he wanted was now pleading for my mercy. He expected me to fall back into my old role. He expected the quiet, marginalized sister to cover up his mess and protect the family reputation. I turned my gaze away from him and addressed the police. "He does not live here," I stated clearly, ensuring every word carried absolute certainty. "I did not invite him. I did not ask him to check on my property. He is trespassing, and I want to press full charges." Brad let out a strangled gasp. "Kim, you cannot do this. It will ruin me." The second officer stepped forward, grabbing Brad by the wrists and pulling his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the cabin. It was the sound of the trap closing permanently. "You have the right to remain silent." The officer began reciting the standard legal warning while dragging my struggling brother-in-law toward the exit. Brad continued to babble, pleading with the officers, offering to pay for the broken door, swearing he just made a stupid mistake. His voice faded as they escorted him across the deck and out to the waiting patrol vehicles. The lead officer remained inside, pulling a small notepad from his uniform pocket. "We will need a formal statement regarding the break-in," he said, clicking his pen. "Do you have any idea what he was looking for?" I looked down at the ruined cedar wood and the scattered books. I thought about the heavy leather notebook sitting safely inside a waterproof container, hidden deep beneath the floorboards of my bedroom closet. The corporate ledger was untouchable. The evidence of my parents' financial theft was already resting in the digital inbox of a forensic accountant. And now the husband of the sole beneficiary was heading to a jail cell charged with felony home invasion. The Cook family launched a war over a $10 million inheritance. They spent their entire lives treating me like a disposable shadow. Tonight they learned the shadow had teeth. He was looking for something that does not belong to him, I told the officer. And he is never going to find it. 48 hours after a county sheriff placed my brother-in-law in the back of a squad car, the Cook family legal counsel requested an emergency mediation. They did not ask for a meeting to apologize. They demanded an audience to negotiate their way out of a criminal charge. The location they chose was a sprawling corner boardroom on the top floor of a downtown Grand Rapids high-rise. It was the home turf of Marcus Vance. Evelyn, Sterling, and I arrived exactly on time. We walked through the double glass doors into a room designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline. The conference table was carved from a single slab of dark mahogany. Sitting on the opposite side were my parents, my sister, and their hired legal mercenary. They arranged themselves like a royal court holding an inquisition. Gregory sat in the center wearing a charcoal pinstripe suit. He projected the rigid posture of a man accustomed to giving orders and demanding instant compliance. Throughout his career managing the family construction firm, he routinely used expensive lawyers to bankrupt smaller subcontractors who dared to dispute his invoices. He intended to use the exact same strategy against his youngest daughter. Susan sat next to him, clutching a quilted designer handbag in her lap. Her pristine posture failed to hide the nervous tremor in her fingers. Jessica sat on the far left. The past 2 days had clearly taken a toll on her pristine facade. With her husband currently sitting in a county holding cell awaiting a bail hearing, her usual haughty glow was replaced by tight, pale skin and dark circles under her eyes. Yet despite the reality of their situation, they all radiated an unearned arrogance. They truly believed they still controlled the board. Marcus Vance stood at the head of the table. He wore a suit that cost more than my monthly salary, but he still managed to look cheap. His smile was slick and practiced. He gestured for Evelyn and me to take the empty leather chairs across from my family. "Let us keep this brief and productive," Marcus began. He did not offer to shake hands. He unclasped a thick leather briefcase and pulled out a towering stack of legal documents, dropping them onto the mahogany surface with a heavy thud. "We are here to resolve a simple family misunderstanding before it spirals into unnecessary public litigation." "A family misunderstanding," I repeated, letting the words hang in the cold air. "Your client broke into my home with a steel crowbar in the middle of the night." Marcus waved his hand, brushing the felony home invasion aside like a minor traffic ticket. "Bradley was simply acting on behalf of the primary estate beneficiary. He was securing property that Jessica reasonably believed required protection. The police involvement was an unfortunate overreaction on your part, Kimberly. We are prepared to overlook your rash behavior if we can reach a sensible agreement today." He slid a document across the table. It was a formal waiver of prosecution. "My clients are willing to make a generous concession," Marcus continued, folding his hands together. "You will contact the district attorney and officially drop all trespassing and breaking and entering charges against Bradley. In return, my clients will not hold you liable for the emotional distress you caused. Furthermore, you will immediately surrender the leather ledger William left in your possession." Evelyn sat beside me, resting her hands quietly in her lap. She did not reach for the paper. She did not interject. She maintained a sterile, calculating silence. Marcus leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the table. "If you refuse this offer, Kimberly, we will file a formal injunction against the estate tomorrow morning. We will contest the validity of the entire will. We will tie William Cook and his assets up in probate court for the next 10 years. You will spend every hour of your life dealing with subpoenas and depositions. We will bleed a public school teacher dry with legal fees until you have nothing left. Hand over the notebook today and you can walk away." Jessica could not contain herself any longer. She leaned across the table, her eyes narrowing into sharp, bitter slits. "You are such a vindictive child, Kim." She spat the words out like poison. "Brad is sitting in a dirty jail cell because you want to play the victim. You have always been jealous of my life. You are holding a meaningless old diary hostage just to punish us for being successful. Stop acting like a martyr and give us what belongs to our family." I looked at my sister. She was drowning in debt, unable to access her $10 million inheritance, and her husband was facing prison time. Yet she still believed she possessed the high ground. Evelyn remained perfectly still beside me. Her silence was a brilliant tactical maneuver. By refusing to engage in their petty verbal sparring, she allowed Marcus and my family to keep talking. She was giving them enough rope to hang themselves on the official record. They were openly admitting to extortion, trying to trade a criminal prosecution for a financial asset. Gregory mistook Evelyn observing for Evelyn retreating. He assumed my high-priced Lansing attorney was intimidated by Marcus Vance. He decided it was time to deliver the final killing blow. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a single sheet of heavy parchment paper. He slid it across the mahogany table toward me. "We tried to do this the nice way," Gregory said. His voice carried the booming, authoritative tone he used to discipline me when I was a teenager, but you refused to listen. As the patriarch of this family and the primary executor of the remaining physical assets, I am taking control of the situation. This is a newly drafted and legally notarized deed transferring the lake cabin back into my direct ownership. You have 24 hours to pack your bags and vacate my property." I looked down at the parchment resting in front of me. It was a standard quitclaim deed formatted to look official and commanding. The text claimed the property was transferred from William Cook to Gregory Cook. I read the dense paragraphs, keeping my expression entirely neutral. My eyes drifted toward the bottom right corner of the page. There was a signature and a blue ink notary stamp. The name on the circular stamp read, Todd Fletcher. I recognized that name immediately. Todd was not an independent legal professional. He was a frequent guest at my parents' country club and Brad's regular golf partner. My brother-in-law called in a favor from his wealthy friend to legitimize a fraudulent document. But the notary seal was not the fatal error. The actual pebble that destroyed their entire scheme was the date printed directly beneath the signature. Todd Fletcher dated his official notary stamp 3 days after my grandfather passed away. It is physically impossible for a dead man to sign a real estate transfer. Gregory was so desperate to secure the property and evict me that he forced a backdated forgery without checking the chronological logic. He just handed me undeniable documentary evidence of real estate fraud during a recorded legal mediation. I looked up from the forged deed. I looked at Gregory puffing his chest out in a display of hollow dominance. I looked at Jessica sneering at me from across the table. I looked at Marcus Vance, who smugly believed he just orchestrated a flawless victory. A slow, calm smile spread across my face. The tension in the room shifted instantly. My reaction broke their script. They expected me to cry. They expected me to beg for more time or frantically consult my silent attorney. They did not expect me to smile at a man threatening to render me homeless. I reached down into my canvas tote bag resting near my feet. I grasped the heavy, worn binding of my grandfather's legacy. I lifted the battered leather notebook and placed it dead center on the polished mahogany table. The tarnished brass lock caught the overhead fluorescent lighting. The room went dead silent. Gregory stared at the ledger like a starving man looking at a feast. Jessica leaned forward, her eyes wide with greedy anticipation. Marcus Vance exhaled a sharp breath, reaching his hand out to pull the book toward his side of the table. I placed my hand firmly over the leather cover, stopping him. "You wanted this so badly," I said. My voice was smooth, unbothered, and echoing in the quiet boardroom. "Let us read it." The law office was silent, except for the faint hum of the city traffic filtering through the thick glass windows. Evelyn Sterling leaned forward. Her posture shifted from a passive observer to a lethal executioner. She did not raise her voice or pound her fist against the table. She simply reached across the polished mahogany surface and pulled the weathered notebook toward her own chair. She aligned the brass dials to the unlock sequence with practiced precision. The metallic click echoed like a judge striking a wooden gavel. She opened the thick leather cover and smoothed the yellowed pages flat. Marcus Vance watched her hands. His smug smile began to fray at the edges. A seasoned courtroom predator recognizes when the temperature in a room drops. "We will begin with the financial disclosures," Evelyn stated. Her tone was clinical and devoid of any negotiation. My client spent yesterday evening reviewing these private entries. She forwarded several specific alphanumeric routing sequences to my forensic accounting team in Lansing. We requested an expedited overnight review, comparing these handwritten codes against federal banking records. Evelyn pulled a sleek black folder from her briefcase. She opened it and extracted a stack of printed bank statements stamped with red verification seals. She slid the top page across the table, positioning it directly in front of my father. Gregory stared at the document. The confident swagger he brought into the boardroom evaporated. His jaw tightened. 12 years ago, William Cook authorized a distinct personal withdrawal, Evelyn explained. The ledger indicates a sum of $80,000 was designated specifically for Kimberly to pay her university tuition. The corresponding bank records verify those funds left his primary account. However, they never reached any educational institution. The forensic trace proves the entire sum was diverted into a private offshore holding fund registered under your name, Gregory. Susan gripped the handles of her quilted designer bag so hard her knuckles turned a stark, translucent white. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her flawless makeup looking like a pale ceramic mask. You used stolen educational funds to finance a destination wedding, Evelyn continued. That is not a family secret. That is textbook embezzlement and wire fraud. The statute of limitations for corporate theft of this magnitude extends significantly when the funds traverse international holding accounts. Gregory opened his mouth to speak, but his voice betrayed him. It emerged as a dry, raspy whisper. That is a misunderstanding, he stammered. His chest heaved as he searched for an excuse. It was a temporary business loan. My father knew I was reallocating the capital to handle a cash flow issue. I meant to pay it back. You never paid a single cent back, I said. I kept my gaze locked on his eyes. I ate stale food and worked double shifts smelling like grease for 4 years while you drank imported champagne on my dime. You did not borrow anything. You robbed your own child. Marcus Vance cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his expensive suit. He tried to reclaim the narrative. These are ancient family grievances, he argued. They have no bearing on the current estate probation or the eviction notice my client served today. Evelyn turned her piercing gaze toward the sleazy attorney. Her eyes narrowed. Do not interrupt me, counsel, she warned. We are not discussing grievances. We are discussing a verifiable pattern of felony fraud. And since you brought up the eviction notice, let us address the parchment your client just presented. She reached across the table and picked up the single sheet of heavy paper Gregory had pushed toward me minutes earlier. She held the forged quitclaim deed up to the light, examining the blue notary stamp near the bottom margin. You drafted this document? Marcus Evelyn asked. Vance sat up straighter. My office prepared the standard template, yes. My client facilitated the signature and the notarization process independently to expedite the transition of the property. Evelyn offered a thin, razor-sharp smile. Then your client just handed you a one-way ticket to a disbarment hearing. She dropped the forged deed onto the table. William Cook did not own that lake cabin when he died. He transferred the title, the surrounding acres, and a portfolio of commercial real estate into an anonymous holding entity called Cedar and Pine Limited Liability Company exactly 5 years ago. He retained zero personal ownership. He could not legally sign a quitclaim deed. She pointed a manicured finger at the blue ink stamp. Furthermore, the notary seal provided by Todd Fletcher is dated 3 days after William passed away. Your client manufactured a fraudulent real estate document, backdated the signature, and attempted to extort my client into abandoning her legal residence under the threat of fabricated litigation. The air in the boardroom turned suffocating. Marcus Vance stared at the blue stamp. The realization of his own peril hit him with brutal force. He was a mercenary who operated in the gray areas of the law, bullying vulnerable targets. But he was not stupid. He knew the difference between a frivolous lawsuit and federal real estate fraud. By presenting that forged document during a recorded legal mediation, Gregory had transformed his own attorney into an accessory to a crime. Vance physically recoiled. He pushed his leather chair away from the table, putting immediate distance between himself and my father. He snapped his briefcase shut. I was not informed of any structural transfers, Vance stated. His voice was rigid, frantic to establish plausible deniability. My firm was operating under the assumption that the provided documents were authentic. I cannot represent clients who submit falsified materials during a mediation. You are my lawyer, Gregory shouted, standing up from his chair. I am paying you a fortune to fix this. You are paying me to litigate a will, Vance snapped back. You did not pay me to act as an accomplice to forgery. I am formally withdrawing my representation effective this exact second. Vance grabbed his briefcase and walked rapidly toward the glass doors. He did not look back. The hired predator realized he walked into a trap and abandoned his sinking clients without a shred of hesitation. Gregory slowly sank back into his chair. The patriarch who ruled his household with iron authority was reduced to a pale, trembling shell. Susan covered her face with her hands, unable to look at me. The legal front they built to crush me collapsed into dust in less than 5 minutes. But Jessica refused to surrender. My sister spent her entire life shielding herself from consequences by hiding behind money. She watched her husband get arrested. She watched her parents face devastating criminal exposure. She watched her aggressive lawyer flee the room. None of it mattered to her. Her mind was singular. She only cared about her own comfort. She slammed her palms against the mahogany table. "Fine," she yelled. Her voice echoed shrill and desperate across the empty boardroom. "Send Brad to jail. Charge Dad for taking the tuition money. I do not care. None of this touches me." She pointed a manicured finger at my face. "You can keep the stupid cabin in the woods, Kim. You can play business owner with a bunch of dusty old ledgers. But the lawyer read the will 2 days ago. I am still the sole beneficiary of the primary estate. I still inherit $10 million. Once the bank clears the administrative freeze, I will hire my own legal team. I will bury you so deep you will never see the sun again." She stood up, grabbing her structured designer handbag. "I am leaving," she announced. "I will wait for my check to clear." I did not move. I let her take 2 steps toward the exit before I spoke. "You have not actually read the terms of the trust, have you, Jess?" My voice was ice cold. The words stopped her dead in her tracks. She turned around, her designer handbag slipping from her shoulder, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. Evelyn Sterling opened the final compartment of her black folder. She pulled out a pristine stack of legal documents bound by a heavy brass staple. The cover page bore the official seal of the state and the verified signature of William Cook. "This is the master trust document," Evelyn stated. She slid the heavy stack across the long table until it rested near the edge where Jessica was standing. The document the previous attorney read during the initial meeting was merely a summary of intent. It did not outline the specific behavioral contingencies binding the liquid assets. Jessica stared at the thick stack of paper. The arrogant confidence drained out of her posture, leaving behind a hollow, fragile shell. "Contingencies," she whispered. "My grandfather knew exactly who you were," I said. "He knew you would measure your worth by the balance in your checking account. He knew you would try to use his wealth as a weapon against anyone standing in your way. So he built a wall around the money." I nodded toward the document resting on the table. "The $10 million you inherited is a decoy. It is a conditional shell account linked directly to the final pages of my leather notebook." Jessica looked down at the documents and then back at my face. The reality of the situation began to settle over her shoulders like a suffocating weight. The overlapping conflicts detonated, leaving her standing in the wreckage of her own unearned pride. The money was not free. It was bait, and she had swallowed the hook whole. The silence in the boardroom possessed a suffocating weight. Jessica stood motionless at the edge of the mahogany table, her fingers hovering inches above the thick stack of legal paper. The designer leather handbag slipped from her shoulder, landing on the plush carpet with a muted thud. She stared at Evelyn Sterling. The polished society wife facade cracked, revealing the terrified, spoiled child hiding underneath. Evelyn did not offer a comforting smile. She opened the master trust document to a section marked with a bright red adhesive tab. Her voice remained calm, projecting the clinical detachment of a surgeon operating on a fatal wound. "I direct your attention to Section 4, subsection B," Evelyn began. "William Cook understood the inherent risks of transferring generational wealth. He possessed a profound understanding of human nature. More specifically, he understood the exact nature of the people sitting in this room. He anticipated your immediate entitlement. Therefore, he installed a functional failsafe, a character clause." Jessica blinked, her breathing growing shallow. "What is a character clause?" she asked. Her tone lacked its usual venom. It was hollow. "It is a behavioral mandate," Evelyn answered. William decreed that the primary liquid estate, valued at $10 million, would remain entirely frozen for a probationary period of 30 days following the reading of his will. During this month-long window, the primary beneficiary was required to demonstrate good faith and familial loyalty. Furthermore, the beneficiary was strictly forbidden from initiating any hostile legal or financial actions against Kimberly Cook. Gregory sank lower into his leather chair. His face turned the color of wet ash. Susan covered her mouth, stifling a quiet gasp. They realized the trap before Jessica did. They possessed enough business acumen to recognize a closed snare. Hostile actions, Jessica repeated. She shook her head, trying to deny the reality unfolding in front of her. That is subjective. That means nothing in a real court. Evelyn adjusted her reading glasses and focused her eyes on the printed page. William was remarkably thorough. He defined hostile actions with specific examples. The prohibited conduct includes, but is not limited to, attempting forced eviction from established residences, engaging in targeted financial coercion, facilitating the theft of physical estate property, or executing unauthorized real estate transfers. Evelyn closed the heavy folder. The sharp snap of the cardboard cover echoed through the silent room. If the beneficiary violates any of these terms during the probationary 30 days, Evelyn continued, the decoy trust dissolves instantly. The $10 million is automatically revoked, and the entirety of those funds reverts permanently to Cedar and Pine Limited Liability Company. I sat back in my chair and watched my sister. The realization washed over her in slow, devastating waves. For 31 years, she skated through life avoiding consequences. Our parents shielded her from every mistake, funded her every whim, and taught her that rules were meant for other people. But they could not shield her from the ghost of our grandfather. He gave you a very simple test. Jess, I said. My voice broke the quiet tension in the room. You only had to pretend to be a decent sister for one single month. You just had to leave me alone for 30 days. If you managed to do that, you would have walked away with $10 million. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the dark wood. But you could not do it. 2 hours after the lawyer read the will, you sent me an official eviction notice trying to render me homeless. Yesterday, you tried to extort me at a coffee shop, offering a fraction of a % of your presumed wealth to steal my corporate assets. And last night, you sent your husband to break down my door with a steel crowbar. Jessica took a stumbling step backward away from the table. She clutched her chest, her manicured fingers digging into the fabric of her expensive silk blouse. You set me up, she whispered, her voice trembling. You knew about this. You tricked me. I did not make you send that email, I replied. I did not force you to draft a fraudulent buyout contract. I did not hand Brad a weapon and point him toward my cabin. You did all of those things on your own. Your own greed pulled the trigger. The seventh layer of our family conflict laid bare on the mahogany table. My parents and my sister thought they were fighting me. They assumed I was a weak opponent they could easily crush, but they were never fighting me. They were fighting an old man who built an empire. William Cook engineered a flawless mirror, reflecting their worst traits right back at them. He handed Jessica the illusion of extreme wealth just to watch her destroy herself trying to protect it. A primal sound erupted from my sister. It was a piercing, shrill shriek of pure, unadulterated anguish. Her knees buckled and she collapsed into the empty chair beside her. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing with a frantic, chaotic energy. The $10 million evaporated into thin air. Her luxury vehicles would be repossessed. Her credit lines would default. She would have to mortgage her pristine suburban home just to afford the legal defense required to keep her husband out of a state penitentiary. Gregory watched his favorite daughter shatter. The formidable patriarch routine vanished entirely. He realized his embezzlement was documented, his real estate forgery was exposed, and his hired attorney was gone. The predator became the prey. He turned his eyes toward me. The shift in his demeanor was instantaneous and deeply unsettling. The booming authoritarian voice disappeared, replaced by a soft, trembling plea. Kimberly, please, he begged, reaching his trembling hand across the wide table. "We can fix this. We are blood. We made some terrible miscalculations, but we are your parents. You cannot let them take everything from us. You cannot let your sister lose her future." Susan nodded frantically, tears streaming down her pale face, ruining her flawless cosmetics. "We love you, Kim," she sobbed. "We have always loved you. The money just clouded our judgment. You are a kind, forgiving person. You have such a big heart. Please do not do this to your own family." They weaponized their tears. When intimidation and fraud failed, they pivoted seamlessly to guilt. They expected me to shrink back into my historical role. They wanted me to absorb their pain, fix their mistakes, and sacrifice my own stability to ensure their comfort. They wanted the quiet history teacher to save them. I looked at the woman crying across from me. I remembered the cherry pie sitting on my kitchen counter, a prop designed to mimic affection delivered by a mother who could not even remember what fruit might stop my lungs from working. I looked at the man begging for mercy. I remembered the $80,000 stolen from my college fund. I remembered the smell of stale diner grease and the exhausting weight of a decade of student debt. He stole my youth to buy ice sculptures for the daughter currently sobbing in the corner. My heart felt remarkably steady. There was no lingering anger. There was no petty desire for revenge. There was only a profound, unbreakable clarity. "You are asking me to remember that we are a family," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. Gregory nodded, his eyes wide with desperate hope. "Yes, sweetheart, we are family." I slowly shook my head. Family is not a title, I told him. It is an action. It is showing up when things are difficult. It is protecting the people you claim to love. You used me as a financial stepping stone. You treated my life like a disposable resource to fund your own ego. I looked at Jessica, who lifted her tear-streaked face to meet my gaze. "And you treated me like an obstacle you could simply erase," I added. I reached out and placed my hand on the worn leather cover of my grandfather's notebook. I traced the tarnished brass lock with my thumb. "Your actions have consequences," I stated, finalizing the verdict. "I am not destroying your future. I am simply refusing to save you from the fires you set yourselves." Gregory dropped his hand, letting it fall against the mahogany wood. The desperate hope in his eyes extinguished, leaving a hollow, vacant stare. Susan buried her face in her husband's shoulder, weeping loudly into the fabric of his expensive suit. Jessica stared at the ceiling, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The boardroom felt entirely different now. The unearned confidence was stripped away. The intimidation tactics were neutralized. The Cook family empire was officially restructured, and the true heir was finally recognized. But Evelyn Sterling was not quite finished. She reached across the table and picked up the heavy leather ledger. She looked at me with a rare, genuine smile softening her stern features. "You handled their illusions perfectly," Kimberly Evelyn said. "Now it is time to show them the reality." She turned the notebook around, placing it directly in front of me. She flipped past the property deeds, past the holding company codes, and past the evidence of corporate theft. She stopped on the very last page of the ledger. "Read it," Evelyn instructed. "Read the final entry William wrote." I looked down at the yellowed paper. The cursive ink was different here. It was not rigid or mathematical. It was flowing and deeply personal. My grandfather left one last secret hidden inside the lockbox, and this secret was about to redefine my entire existence. The paper felt brittle under my fingertips. The ink was faded to a soft charcoal hue. I took a slow, deep breath. The air in the boardroom felt incredibly thin. I lowered my eyes to the yellowed page and began to speak. "My dearest Kimberly." My voice trembled on the first word, but I forced my lungs to steady. I needed the people sitting across from me to hear every single syllable. For years, I sat at the head of holiday dinner tables and observed how this family treated you. I saw your father deny your potential. I saw your mother ignore your achievements. I watched you take on crippling debt while they funded frivolous, extravagant parties. I paused for a fraction of a second. The validation hit my chest like a warm, heavy stone. For my entire adult life, I thought my pain was invisible. I thought I was suffering in an empty void. But my grandfather saw everything. He witnessed every slight and every stolen opportunity. He catalogued their cruelty in silence. I continued reading. You never asked me for a handout. You never complained when your sister paraded her unearned gifts in front of you. You chose a noble profession. You chose to teach. You chose to build a quiet, honest life in a small, rustic cabin by the water. You remained kind in a household that treated you like a disposable shadow. Susan let out a soft, wounded whimper. I did not look up from the page. I knew my end was approaching. The letter continued. I also knew that handing the primary estate to Jessica would be a fatal error. Your parents raised her to view money as a weapon. Handing her my legacy would only give her the ammunition to destroy you. So I engineered a different path. I am leaving Jessica the illusion of wealth to see what she does with it. I designed a test she was always destined to fail. Her own pride will be the mechanism of her ruin. But I am leaving you the keys to the kingdom. I took another breath. The next paragraph shifted from a personal letter to a binding legal declaration. The cursive writing became sharp and authoritative. By the authority vested in me, I explicitly name Kimberly Cook as the sole managing member and irrevocable owner of Cedar and Pine Limited Liability Company. This entity holds the legal deeds to the Traverse City commercial properties, the Coastal Lake House, the corporate investment portfolios, and the $10 million liquid trust currently reverting from the primary estate. I stopped reading. The words hung suspended in the chilled air of the boardroom. The leather journal they mocked just days ago. The item my brother-in-law called a diary. The object my sister tried to buy for pennies. It was never a sentimental keepsake. It was the true last will and testament of William Cook. The payoff hit the room like a freight train. Jessica let out a guttural sob. Her expensive posture crumbled entirely. She slid down in her chair, burying her face in her arms against the dark wood surface. Her designer silk blouse wrinkled. Her carefully curated society image disintegrated into a puddle of smeared cosmetics and genuine despair. She was no longer the wealthy heiress. She was a broke, unemployed woman married to a criminal. Gregory watched his favored daughter break down. The reality of his total defeat snapped whatever rational control he possessed. He spent his entire adulthood acting like a titan of industry. In a matter of minutes, a high school history teacher and a deceased old man stripped his power away. He let out a primal roar. He lunged across the wide mahogany table. His hands reached out, grasping for the battered ledger. He believed that if he could just take the book, he could tear the pages out and erase his nightmare. Evelyn Sterling did not flinch. She anticipated the physical desperation of a cornered man. She reached out and slid the journal smoothly across the polished wood, pulling it safely out of his reach. "Sit down, Gregory," Evelyn commanded. Her tone cracked, echoing sharply off the glass windows. He hovered over the table, his chest heaving, his face a dark shade of crimson. "Give me that book," he demanded. Evelyn tapped a small black device resting near her briefcase. It was a digital audio recorder. A tiny red light blinked steadily on its surface. "This entire mediation is being recorded," Evelyn stated. "You are currently lunging across the surface, attempting to steal corporate property from my client. If you take one more step forward, I will press a panic button and have the building security hold you until the local authorities arrive. Given that your son-in-law was arrested for a similar offense last night, I highly suggest you lower your voice and return to your seat." Gregory froze. The mention of the police drained the rage out of his muscles. He looked at the blinking red light. He looked at Evelyn. Then he looked at me. He slowly lowered himself back into his leather chair. The fight was over. The surrender was absolute. I picked up the ledger and placed it carefully into my canvas tote bag. I zipped the fabric shut. The sound was loud in the defeated silence of the room. I looked at the three people sitting across from me. They were strangers. They always had been. "You spent 12 years treating me like a shadow," I said. I kept my voice even and calm. "You thought keeping me in the dark would make me weak. You never realized that shadows are the best place to observe people revealing who they truly are." I stood up from my chair. I did not wait for a response. There was nothing left for them to say. Their financial theft was documented, their real estate forgery was exposed, their grand inheritance was dissolved. I turned my back on them and walked toward the double glass doors. Evelyn followed close behind, carrying her sleek black briefcase. I pushed the heavy doors open and stepped out into the carpeted hallway. I did not look back. I did not need to see their faces one last time. I could hear Jessica weeping. I could hear the hollow silence of my parents suffocating under the weight of their own greed. We took the elevator down to the main lobby. The descent was smooth and quiet. The tight knot of anxiety I carried in my chest for over a decade began to loosen. When the metal doors opened, the bright afternoon sunlight spilled across the marble floors. We walked out onto the bustling city street. The Michigan air felt remarkably clean. They are going to face a very harsh reality, Evelyn noted, walking beside me on the concrete sidewalk. I nodded, looking down at the canvas bag resting against my side. The boardroom was just the beginning. Brad was still sitting in a county jail cell, waiting for his arraignment. The country club social circle in Grand Rapids thrived on rumors. The moment the police report hit the public record, the whispers would start. My parents and my sister cared about their pristine reputation above all else. They were about to discover how quickly high society turns on its own when the money runs dry. The world was about to find out exactly what kind of people the Cook family really were, and I was finally free to live my life without them. 2 weeks passed since the fateful mediation inside the downtown Grand Rapids boardroom. The fallout was not a sudden fiery explosion. It was a slow, methodical landslide that altered the entire landscape of my family. In affluent circles like the ones my parents and sister navigated, reputation served as the ultimate currency. Once that social currency devalued, the collapse was swift, uncompromising, and unforgiving. I remained at the lake house grading midterms and drinking black coffee on my wooden deck. I did not make a single phone call to ruin them. I did not need to lift a finger or enact any grand scheme of petty revenge. Their own staggering financial hubris acted as the perfect executioner. Gravity simply did the work. The dominoes started falling with my brother-in-law. County jail records are a matter of public domain. A local journalist reviewing the weekly police blotter noticed a prominent society surname attached to a felony home invasion charge. The brief article ran in the Sunday edition of the regional paper, noting the address of the incident and the use of a steel crowbar. By Monday morning, the gossip saturated the manicured lawns of their gated suburban community. The board of directors at Brad's exclusive golf and country club held a discreet emergency meeting inside their oak-paneled dining room. Men who previously bought him expensive scotch and laughed at his jokes now voted unanimously to sever ties. He received a formal letter delivered via courier to his front door. The crisp parchment politely informed him that his membership was suspended indefinitely, pending the resolution of his serious criminal charges. They requested he clear his locker and surrender his access badges immediately. The arrogant man, who defined his entire personal worth by his golf handicap and his wealthy associates, was exiled from the only sanctuary he understood. Jessica suffered a much louder and far more public humiliation. Her entire lifestyle operated on the assumption of endless incoming wealth. She financed luxury goods on high-interest credit, banking heavily on the $10 million estate to cover the ballooning balances. When Evelyn Sterling officially dissolved the Decoy Trust, the financial institutions reacted with clinical speed. It happened on a bright Tuesday afternoon. A heavy-duty commercial tow truck pulled into my sister's pristine driveway. The driver did not bother knocking on the front door. He simply backed his massive rig up to the custom luxury sports utility vehicle sitting on the pavement. He engaged the hydraulic lift, sliding the thick steel hooks under the front axle, and hoisted the expensive machine into the air. Jessica ran out of the house wearing a silk designer robe, screaming at the driver to stop. She demanded he unhook her vehicle, claiming there was a simple banking error that her wealth manager would fix by the end of the day. The driver ignored her frantic pleas. He handed her a printed repossession order, climbed back into his cab, and secured the load. Her affluent neighbors stood on their front porches, holding watering cans and cups of herbal tea, watching the spectacle unfold. The woman who once mocked my used sedan was left standing barefoot on her driveway, watching her ultimate status symbol get towed down the street in broad daylight. My parents faced a different kind of destruction. The forensic accounting team in Lansing completed their thorough audit of Cedar and Pine. While Evelyn kept the detailed findings out of public criminal court to protect my grandfather's broader corporate legacy, the financial sector is a very small, interconnected world. Whispers of offshore accounts, fabricated vendor invoices, and missing payroll funds reached Gregory's senior business partners. They summoned my father to a private meeting at their corporate headquarters. They presented him with an undeniable ultimatum, sliding a thick contract across a glass table. The irony of the situation was poetic. The partners offered him two distinct choices. He could face a highly publicized federal inquiry involving the stolen educational funds, or he could sign a binding agreement stepping down from the firm immediately. The second option required him to surrender his executive pension, his voting rights, and all future equity shares. Gregory chose the silent exit. The patriarch who boasted for decades about building a Titan enterprise from the ground up was forced into an early, uncompensated retirement. His business associates severed all ties, changing the corporate locks and wiping his name from the company letterhead. His empire evaporated, leaving him with nothing but mounting legal bills, a fractured reputation, and a legacy of shame. I watched the asymmetrical fallout from a safe distance. The local news websites and the subtle text messages from distant relatives painted a vivid picture of their ruin. I did not feel a dark sense of triumph. Revenge requires holding on to anger, and my anger was finally gone. I felt a profound cleansing relief. The suffocating weight I carried for a decade lifted from my shoulders. Justice was served simply by stepping aside and letting the truth breathe. On a quiet Thursday evening, I sat down at my wooden desk. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Federal Student Loan Servicing portal. The screen displayed the familiar crushing number. A severe 5-figure debt that dictated my dietary choices, my living arrangements, and my constant underlying anxiety for 9 long years. I opened the Cedar and Pine corporate banking dashboard on a separate, secure tab. The available balance flashing on the screen was staggering. It was more capital than I could reasonably spend in a single lifetime. But I did not want luxury vehicles or designer clothes or country club memberships. I wanted my freedom. I linked the holding company routing numbers directly to the federal loan portal. I typed the exact payoff amount into the designated payment field. My hands hovered over the keyboard for a long, silent moment. I thought about the smell of stale diner grease from my undergraduate shifts. I thought about the sleepless nights studying while my sister drank imported champagne in Aspen on my stolen dime. I pressed submit. A digital loading wheel spun on the screen for 3 agonizing seconds. Then the web page refreshed. The bold black numbers shifted. The new current balance read $0.00. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Hot tears spilled over my eyelashes, tracking slowly down my cheeks. They were not tears of sorrow or grief. They were drops of pure, unadulterated joy. The heavy iron chains my parents locked around my ankles so many years ago were finally broken. I was a free woman. I owned my home. I owned my future. With the crushing debt erased, I turned my attention toward building something meaningful. My grandfather built his wealth by laying strong foundations for his community. I wanted to honor that specific spirit. I contacted the principal at my high school and scheduled a formal meeting. Using a fractional percentage of the LLC funds, I established a permanent historical preservation grant. The program was designed to fund educational field trips, supply modern, updated textbooks, and provide robust scholarships for underprivileged students who wanted to study history at the university level. I did not name the grant after myself. I named it the William Cook Memorial Initiative. I ensured his true legacy was permanently tied to education and generosity rather than the selfish greed my parents displayed. The tension that defined my daily existence fully dissipated. It was replaced by the deep, unshakable satisfaction of a life secured. The legal battles were over. The corporate assets were locked safely under Evelyn Sterling's impeccable management. I resumed teaching my classes, finding renewed joy in the simple act of sharing knowledge with the next generation. The dust settled across the state of Michigan, bringing a peaceful quiet to the lake house. But total financial ruin rarely breeds quiet acceptance. Desperation forces people to abandon their pride and seek shelter wherever they can find it. When the bank accounts run dry and the high society social circles turn their backs, the isolated inevitably turn toward the only door left standing. I knew the peaceful silence would not last forever. Someone was going to show up at my cabin looking for a lifeline. Late autumn arrived, carrying relentless storms off the dark waters of Lake Michigan. The temperature plummeted, transforming the gentle autumn breeze into a biting coastal wind. Sheets of heavy rain battered the cedar shingles of my roof, providing a steady drumming rhythm. I spent the afternoon sitting beside the stone fireplace, grading a stack of historical essays. The burning logs offered a comforting, radiant heat, pushing the damp chill out of the living room. The legal chaos of the past month felt distant, separated from my sanctuary by miles of dense pine forest and ironclad corporate boundaries. The crunch of tires rolling over wet gravel broke my concentration. I set my red pen down on the coffee table and walked toward the front window. A vehicle parked near the edge of the tree line. It was not a pristine luxury sports utility vehicle with custom chrome rims. It was a dull beige compact sedan, the kind of inexpensive rental car issued by discount agencies. The engine sputtered slightly before shutting off. A single figure stepped out into the torrential downpour. She did not carry an umbrella. She did not wear a tailored camel hair trench coat or designer leather boots. She wore faded denim jeans and a plain gray hooded sweatshirt, saturated instantly by the freezing rain, her shoulders hunched forward against the wind. She walked slowly toward the wooden steps of my porch. It was Jessica. I stood behind the glass watching my sister approach. The transformation was jarring. The polished society heiress who strutted into the high-end coffee shop just weeks ago was gone. In her place stood a fragile, exhausted woman stripped of her superficial armor. The financial ruin eroded her unearned confidence, leaving behind a hollow, desperate shell. She climbed the wooden stairs. Her wet sneakers squeaked against the porch floorboards. She hesitated, raising her trembling hand. 3 weak, timid knocks tapped against the solid cedar door. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy door inward. Jessica stood shivering under the covered awning. Water dripped from her unstyled, matted hair, sliding down her pale cheeks. She wore zero cosmetics. The dark circles under her eyes bruised her complexion. She looked a decade older, wrapping her arms tightly around her torso to preserve whatever body heat she had left. "Kim, please do not shut the door," she whispered. Her voice shook, lacking any trace of its former shrill authority. I did not invite her inside. I remained standing in the entryway, letting the cold air swirl around my ankles. I waited for her to state her purpose. "I have nowhere else to go." Jessica continued, her jaw trembling as she spoke. Everyone stopped returning my calls. The girls from the country club blocked my number. Dad and Mom are packing their house to move out of state. They will not even look at me. She took a shaky breath, wiping the rain from her forehead with a wet sleeve. "Brad is facing mandatory prison time. His defense attorneys demanded a 6-figure retainer just to review the discovery files. The bank froze our remaining credit lines. The mortgage on our house is 90 days past due. The foreclosure notice arrived yesterday morning. They are going to take my home, Kim." She looked up at me. Her eyes were red and swollen from days of unbroken weeping. She did not issue a command. She did not threaten me with legal retaliation. She delivered a raw, desperate beg. "I know you have the money," Jessica sobbed, stepping closer to the threshold. "I know the holding company controls everything now. I am just asking for a loan. Just enough to pay the legal retainer and catch up on the mortgage. I will sign a contract. I will pay you back with interest. Please help me." The ultimate test of my boundaries materialized on my front porch. My sister stood in the freezing rain, asking for a lifeline. Society conditions us to believe that blood requires endless sacrifice. We are taught to absorb the toxic behavior of our relatives, under the guise of unconditional loyalty. Jessica banked on that societal conditioning. She hoped the visual impact of her suffering would override my logic. As I looked at her shivering frame, the overlapping histories of our relationship flashed through my mind like a reel of cinematic film. I remembered the sterile glass conference room where the lawyer read the initial will. I remembered Brad scoffing at my inheritance while Jessica offered to buy me a cheap cup of coffee with her $10 million. I remembered sitting across from her at the roasting room watching her slide a blue cashier check across the table, trying to buy my corporate empire for pennies. I remembered the pristine white snow in Aspen, where she drank imported champagne funded entirely by the money our father stole from my college tuition. She was crying on my porch today, not because she felt remorse for those actions. She was crying because she finally experienced a consequence. She mourned the loss of her wealth and her social status. She did not mourn the loss of our sisterhood because she never valued it in the first place. I stepped out onto the covered porch, pulling the door partially shut behind me. The cold wind bit through my sweater, but I kept my posture relaxed and grounded. "I hear how terrified you are, Jess," I said. My voice was soft, cutting through the sound of the falling rain. "I know you are watching your entire reality collapse around you. I know the fear of losing your home is paralyzing." She nodded eagerly, letting out a breathless gasp of hope. "Yes," she cried. "It is a nightmare, Kim. You are the only one who can wake me up." I looked deeply into her panicked eyes. "I validate your fear." I continued, maintaining a steady, unmovable rhythm. "But your current nightmare is the direct result of your own choices. You built your life on arrogance and borrowed capital. When you had the upper hand, you used your position to send me an eviction notice. You tried to throw me out into the street without a second thought." Jessica recoiled as if struck by a physical blow. "We are family," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "You cannot hold on to the past forever. You have millions now. You have more than enough to save us." I shook my head slowly. The peaceful clarity I discovered 2 weeks ago remained perfectly intact. "I forgive you," I said. The words carried the weight of absolute truth. I forgive you because carrying hate is too heavy. It poisons the person holding it. I am letting go of the anger. I paused, letting the wind howl through the pine branches above us. "But forgiveness does not equal access," I stated. "I will not fund the lifestyle of people who view me as an obstacle to their wealth. I will not finance the legal defense of a man who broke into my home with a weapon. I will not light myself on fire to keep you warm." Jessica stared at me. The final flicker of manipulative hope extinguished in her eyes. She realized the quiet, marginalized sister she bullied for 31 years was permanently gone. The boundary I established was made of iron. No amount of guilt or performative weeping could breach it. "You are really going to let me lose everything," she whispered, stepping backward into the rain. "You lost everything the moment you chose greed over loyalty," I replied. "I am just refusing to pay the invoice." I stepped backward into the warm entryway of the cabin. I looked at her one last time, standing alone in the driving storm. I gently pulled the heavy cedar door shut. The brass latch clicked into place. I reached up and turned the deadbolt, securing the physical barrier between her chaos and my peace. The heavy wood muted the sound of the rain. The living room embraced me with quiet, radiant warmth. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the faint sound of the rental car engine sputtering back to life. The tires crunched over the wet gravel, slowly retreating down the long driveway until the forest swallowed the noise entirely. I walked across the room toward the wooden desk resting in the corner. The battered leather notebook sat exactly where I left it. I reached out and ran my fingers over the tarnished brass lock. The metal felt cool and solid beneath my touch. I rolled the dials to the familiar numerical sequence, popping the latch open. I flipped past the holding company deeds and the verified routing numbers, turning directly to the final page. I traced the faded charcoal ink of my grandfather. I read his final declaration, acknowledging my struggle and handing me the keys to the kingdom. For decades, my family operated under the assumption that kindness was a fatal weakness. They believed ruthlessness was the only valid currency. Today, I proved them wrong. True strength does not require screaming or forged documents or high-priced mercenary lawyers. True strength is the ability to look at the people who broke you, recognize their pain, and still choose to protect your own peace. I sat down in the heavy oak chair. I was no longer the victim of their narrative. I was the architect of my own future. I was the silent observer who stepped out of the shadows. I was the protector of the family legacy, honoring a visionary old man who trusted me to hold the line. The storm raged outside the cabin walls, but inside the air was perfectly still. 6 months vanished since that freezing autumn afternoon on my wooden porch. The harsh Michigan winter surrendered to a vibrant, lush spring season. The thick ice covering the lake melted away, leaving behind crystal-clear water reflecting the bright May sunlight. The turbulent chaos surrounding my family dissolved alongside the snowdrifts. The dust finally settled, leaving a permanent, undeniable tranquility in its wake. Gregory and Susan no longer reside within the state lines. Their carefully constructed high society reputation shattered completely when the corporate embezzlement whispers reached the country club dining rooms. Wealthy circles detest public scandal above all else. Their lifelong friends stopped returning phone calls. Their invitations to charity galas ceased arriving altogether. Unable to endure the freezing polite smiles of their former peers, my parents listed their sprawling suburban mansion for a fraction of its market value. They relocated to a modest retirement community down in Florida. They fled their own disgraced legacy. They live in exile, entirely isolated from the empire they tried to steal. My sister experienced a much steeper descent into obscurity. Bradley avoided a maximum prison sentence by accepting a devastating plea agreement. He pleaded guilty to felony trespassing and property damage, receiving 5 years of strict probation alongside crushing court fines. The legal defense costs drained every remaining cent from their accounts. The bank finalized the foreclosure on their pristine estate shortly after the trial concluded. Jessica packed whatever clothing she managed to save from the aggressive creditors and moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment situated near a noisy industrial park. The woman who once mocked my rustic cabin now wakes up every morning listening to commercial delivery trucks rumbling past her single-pane windows. Her designer wardrobe is entirely useless in her new reality. My daily routine looks remarkably unchanged to the casual observer. I still wake up early every weekday morning. I still drive my reliable sedan down to the local high school. I still stand in front of 30 teenagers teaching them about the rise and fall of ancient civilizations. I do not stand in that classroom because I need the municipal paycheck to survive. The holding company generates more revenue in a single business quarter than I could reasonably spend in decades. I teach because guiding young minds brings me genuine joy. I possess the ultimate luxury. I spend my time executing my passion rather than surviving a relentless grind. The William Cook Memorial Initiative launched successfully during the spring semester. We funded 3 major educational field trips and replaced outdated textbooks across the entire history department. Watching underprivileged students receive full university scholarships using the capital my grandfather secured brings a profound warmth to my chest. The wealth is no longer a weapon used to manipulate relatives. It is a tool actively building better futures for children who actually deserve the opportunity. The lake house underwent a careful structural evolution. I hired a specialized architectural firm to restore the property without erasing its soul. We did not tear down the walls to build a modern glass mansion. We preserved my grandfather and his original craftsmanship. The weathered cedar siding was treated and sealed against the elements. The stone fireplace was meticulously cleaned and repointed by master masons. I expanded the rear deck and installed larger thermal windows, allowing natural sunlight to flood the living area. The space feels warm, open, and entirely secure. It is no longer just a borrowed refuge granted by a benevolent relative. It is my permanent fortress. Every evening I return to this quiet sanctuary. I sit at the heavy oak desk resting in the corner of my renovated living space. The battered leather notebook sits exactly where it belongs. Sometimes I run my fingers over the tarnished brass lock, feeling the cool metal against my skin. The world places incredible value on loud, flashy displays of dominance. Society teaches us to admire imported vehicles, sprawling mansions, and aggressive courtroom maneuvers. My family worshipped those loud, fragile things. They lost everything trying to protect an illusion built on stolen funds. The greatest gifts are rarely loud. They do not arrive wrapped in silk ribbons or announced by arrogant lawyers sitting in glass boardrooms. The most profound gifts are remarkably quiet. They look like a worn ledger tucked inside a canvas tote bag. They look like an old man observing the world from a distance, calculating the exact moment to intervene on behalf of the marginalized. My grandfather handed me a map disguised as worthless junk. He gave me the tools to dismantle a toxic hierarchy without ever raising my voice in anger. For 31 years, I believed my worth was tied to my ability to absorb pain. I thought shrinking myself down to accommodate their massive egos was the only way to survive within the family unit. I was completely wrong. The events of the past several months taught me a permanent, unshakable truth. Establishing boundaries is not a malicious act of punishment directed at other people. Setting a rigid boundary is a necessary act of profound self-protection. You do not owe anyone your sanity just because you share a genetic lineage. You are allowed to lock the door against the storm. You are allowed to let destructive individuals face the uncompromising consequences of their own choices. I want to pause the narrative right here and ask you a direct question. If you are listening to this story right now, I want you to think about your own life. Have you ever found yourself standing on a porch facing a difficult, heartbreaking decision? Have you ever had to choose your own internal peace over the relentless toxic demands of your relatives? It is a terrifying choice to make. It requires a specific brand of quiet bravery that most people will never fully understand. If you have walked that lonely road, I want to hear from you. Drop down into the comments section below and share your personal journey. Your words might provide the exact strength another woman needs to finally draw her own line in the sand. We spend so much energy worrying about the people who try to break us. We forget that we hold the power to simply walk away from the table. You hold the pen that writes the final chapter of your own personal history. Thank you for spending your valuable time with me today. If you found meaning in this journey, please interact with the video so others can find it. Take care of yourselves out there and never apologize for protecting your peace. The afternoon sun dips lower on the western horizon, casting long golden rays through the large thermal windows. The light lands directly on the smooth wooden desk, illuminating the locked leather notebook. It rests peacefully in the quiet cabin, serving as a permanent silent symbol of resilience, foresight, and ultimate victory.